let yourself get defeated even when you are. You know,
Right.
I got so many rejection letters. It's really easy to just be like, oh, this is impossible. Okay. I think that's the hardest part is you're like, you think that you're some nobody. And it's like, well, I mean, everybody is at first, at least.
That was Lucas Gerke sharing his advice to new authors. Stay tuned to hear more about Lucas's journey as a writer on Pages and Voices. I'm your host, Meg Bell. We'll be back after the intro. Welcome to Pages and Voices, the local author podcast, sponsored by the Allen County Public Library. This podcast is dedicated to featuring the works of talented authors within our community. Today's author guest is Lucas Gerke, author of Internal Damage. Lucas's interest mostly began in film. He majored in film and minored in theater and has been making films and shorts ever since college. His passion for reading formed toward the end of his college career. In the end, Gerke wants to create fiction in any and every form available. Lucas, you're going to share a brief reading with us today, but before you do, let me tell listeners about your book. Told through the minds of the book's characters, Internal Damage is ultimately a human story about survival. Filled with action, monsters, and terror in a sci-fi setting, we witness how life and tragedy can change a person and alter relationships. As the story progresses, the humanity of these characters is reflected on the reader. Author Lucas B. Gerke hopes readers connect with the characters while reading on the edge of their seats. Lucas, you're up.
The diner shakes, knocking my beer off the table. I don't even hear the glass shatter when it hits the floor, but I feel it pelting my leg. What was that? Was that an explosion? The waitstaff begins to panic, and I see Erin across the table staring past me, eyes wide. She saw something. Something bad. I barely have time to register the reality of the situation when a second impact rattles what feels like the entire habitat. Amy falls out of her chair. Looks like she banged her knee pretty bad on the way down, too. I hear Skunk say, "Dude, what the..." And I finally get the sense to look behind me through the diner's entrance. Oh my God. It really was an explosion. 2 of them, actually. We've been hearing about the war in the news, but there's no way Ganymede's contractors would be ordered to attack a civilian habitat. Or maybe I'm just hoping that's not what just happened. Oh God, please tell me that's not what just happened. Amanda! Lawson's voice breaks in through the muffled haze and reality snaps back in. Yeah, I guess it probably looked kind of weird to see me standing there perfectly still while most of the waitstaff and patrons are leaving the building at a full sprint. We need to go. Now. I say it without even thinking. I mean, isn't this just like any other disaster you do drills for in school? Stay away from anything that could fall on your head. Only in this case, hiding under a table won't save us from explosions. And they all listen to me. My siblings I get. I'm sort of the woman of the house after all. But Skunk and Amy? Guess they're probably just scared. Hell, I'm scared too. Or at least I'm assuming I am. My heart's beating against my ribs like a drum roll right now. Guess that's adrenaline doing its job. Let's hope it gets us somewhere safe quicker. We run out with the final wave of people leaving. I hold Erin's hand. You'd think she were a lot younger. Pretty sure in Earth years she's like 15 or something, but her grip on my hand is iron right now. I better not trip. Where are we going? I hear Amy yell over the expected pandemonium in the streets. Geez, where are we going? I don't even know. Oh, who let me lead? Okay, think. What's the smartest play here? We keep running and the streets are flooded with panic. How did this happen so fast? I was waiting for my burger, my real meat burger. It's literally the whole reason we went today, and now we're running who knows where and away from what. I swear I just sipped my drink 30 seconds ago. How did this happen so fast? As I'm trying to figure out which direction is anywhere close to safe, a third explosion completely collapses the northern end of the dome above the habitat. Or is that west? I have no idea where we are. Jesus, the whole thing collapsed. How many people lived under there? Hundreds? More?
Lucas, thank you for sharing. So your book is a nail biter. From the jump. Like that's the first few pages of your book. The action begins and it keeps on rolling for the first 100 pages. I was sitting in my cubicle with big eyes. I was all on edge while I was reading it. It is a fast-paced, easy-to-read book due to the short chapters, which are told from different characters' perspective, and the moving action, constant action. It really sucks you into the story. Where did you get this idea?
So, yeah, it evolved. I knew I wanted it to be first person, and it started with one character who's going to be the main protagonist. Mm-hmm. But as I thought through where I wanted their story to go, the way it went and the way it ended, not only would the story have been really short, but I just felt like that perspective being the only one would have been really unsatisfying. and wouldn't have really provided the reader with kind of what I was trying to go for. And that made me think if I expanded on it and added the other characters' POVs, you kind of, as the reader, you're not just getting one perspective on the thing, because I just feel like that doesn't give you a solid understanding of what I want you to get out of the book. And since it's a survival story, it's a story about people changing internally, I thought it was inadequate to just have one person. And to have it first person and present tense, you're kind of along for the ride.
Yes, you are.
Because you genuinely don't know who makes it out. Because if it's first person but past tense, it's like they're telling you the story. And so you're just assuming they make it.
Yeah, it's pretty intense when you read it. You're really not sure what's happening next.
Good. I'm glad you think so.
It's true. So we're going to dive into the book more and your writing processes more. But have you always had the writing bug?
Storytelling bug for sure. I mean, since I was like really young. So I think when I was a kid, the most common like game I would play with my friends would mostly be, we would call it making a movie. And we just laid out, okay, what's the background plot, and we would just, it was like theater with no audience, and that was the most common thing I did with my friends. Writing,
that's a lot of fun, actually.
It was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
I would say I grew out of it. Obviously, I'm not doing exactly that, but
You're still telling stories.
Yeah, and obviously with a theater background and everything, I was still kind of performing and stuff. So yeah, not writing books specifically, but always telling stories. That's always been with me, I think.
Yeah. So you mentioned your theater background. Where did you get your degree?
I majored in film, which is bundled in with the communications program, but all of my electives were theater anyway.
Yeah.
So I needed to change literally nothing to get a theater minor.
Okay.
So that just kind of worked out.
Made it easy. So when did you decide I'm going to write a science fiction story?
I think I knew I wanted to write a novel at the time that I wrote this. And it was just the story. This specific story it had risen to the surface. And it almost felt natural to be the next story that I try to get out there. Because it was just the one I had been thinking about the most and developing the most at the time. So to me, there was almost no other option, because I was like, I could work on developing a whole new one, or I could just write the one that's already floating there.
Brewing. Yeah. So do you read science fiction?
I read a lot. I feel like I read more fantasy than science fiction, but I still read plenty of both.
Sure. Okay. So it wasn't that much of a leap to actually write a science fiction.
Not particularly, no.
Right. Okay. So was this the first time you ever put your story onto paper?
No, it's actually not. So
you've written other stories?
Yeah, I spent 6 years writing an entire like young adult fantasy novel.
Oh.
Yeah, I worked.
That was your practice?
It ended up being, because I worked on it it was supposed to be kind of just a fun little pet project, but it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I learned a lot from it, but ultimately decided if I wanted to take it anywhere or like publish it or anything, it needed probably a whole rewrite.
Right.
Because at the time I started it, I had no idea what I was doing. But it was a big learning experience.
Yeah.
And so
I hear a lot of authors say that their first book will never see the light of day.
Yeah, and I imagine it won't.
And that's okay. So what did the process look like when you began writing this science fiction book?
So at the very beginning, it looked like, I guess, madness, really, because it was just me pacing back and forth and talking to myself to try to iron out and just playing. I would play various music and try to see which one felt right to help me, like, what fit the aesthetic best, so I could try to figure out. I don't know, that just helps put me in a creative space that'll help me build up exactly what this story needs. And then it was extensive outlining, and then making a broad outline that got more and more detailed. So I made like 3 outlines, I think, eventually. And the third one was almost like a beat for beat summary. So it was almost too long to be called an outline, but that's where I began. And then I once I had that nailed down and I was comfortable with it, I just sat down and started hammering it out.
It was probably easy to write from that point on, wasn't it? Since you had such a detailed outline.
Yes. I don't know if I ever really hit what I would call writer's block. because I did always know what was going to happen next.
Yes.
I hit writer's block during the outlining phase.
Sure.
But once I was actually writing it, it was just getting from one point to the next, and I already knew what the next point was. So unless I realized somehow along the way that I didn't know how to get there, the points weren't, if this makes sense, the points weren't like too far apart. So I felt like I never really got lost.
Yeah.
So once I actually sat down to write it, it got pretty easy.
Okay. So were there any resources you found valuable while writing the book?
Weirdly enough, I mean, the broad strokes way to say that would just be the internet, I suppose. But that's obviously, that in and of itself is not very reliable. So it was finding the right channels that were reliable, especially with like a lot of the more science-y parts of the science fiction. I had to find sources that were actually not just like any schmuck could write that on a web page and say it's true. I had to kind of dive a little deeper and find the articles and such that were actually written by real scientists and astrophysicists. I have a special thanks at the beginning to my brother because he's an engineer, but he also has a big interest in certain areas of technology that I was using in the book. And even though it's the future, we don't know what's going to be there.
No, that's right.
But I kind of used him as a board to bounce ideas off of, being like, okay, so the way such and such is developing, where do you think the most likely direction it'll go is in however many years? So he had a much more educated opinion on it than I would have.
Right. Well, that's handy. For sure. So was there anything you found difficult about the world building? For our listeners who haven't read it, the book is set on Europa, a moon of Jupiter that has been colonized, where time is different than Earth. So what formula did you use to determine a Europan day? Am I saying that right? Europan?
That's how I say it. I don't know what the accepted
okay, well, we're going to go with it.
Is for that.
All right, we're going to go with it. So the formula that you use to determine a Europan day, which is 84 hours. How did you come up with that?
So I did round just a little because it'd be weird to. Everyone's going to compare it to what a day is on Earth.
Right.
Because obviously in this hypothetical, people living on Europa would be used to the time they use in Europa. But I'm having people read it who are, no surprise, from Earth. So they have to, you have to put it in relatable terms. And a day on Europa, since its orbit cycle on its axis is different than Jupiter's, it's like 3.55 days on Earth. Approximately. And so that figure would get really weird if you're trying to do it in hours.
Okay.
So I put it in. It's kind of like how our years aren't technically exactly 365 days, and that's why we have leap years.
Right.
I imagine, and I don't cover it in the book, but I imagine they would have something like almost a leap day or occasional day with an extra hour tacked on because it's not a clean number of hours.
It's not precise.
Yeah. So
sure.
the amount I factored in was what it would make sense to round to that would sound sensible, as opposed to, okay, well, now that it's 83 o'clock and 53 seconds or whatever, and so now we start a new day, I just kind of pared it down to a more simple
Yes, that makes sense.
digit.
So was it confusing to keep all the facts about your world straight as you're writing the book?
Only one thing got lost a bit, and I ended up barely using it. It's such an imperceptible thing. Most of it, like number of hours in a day, that didn't throw me off. At the beginning of every chapter, there's a timestamp.
Yes,
there
is.
Hours are still 60 minutes. Minutes are still 60 seconds. So that wasn't too hard to factor in. And like, I guess things like climate control and the trace amounts of radiation that hits Europa, which it's touched on in the book.
Right.
There's like a very light amount, which I guess if you were exposed to it for a long time, it would be problematic. But
Right, it would add up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So things like that weren't hard, but I did have a dating system that I created that I basically don't even talk about. It's like world building that was extra work for me that didn't really end up factoring in, but I wanted to get everything built in case
Yeah.
it mattered.
That
So
makes
there's
sense, actually.
there's a date at the top of every chapter too, and I think it only changes once because their system of dating. I had in my notes a really complex, like listed out methodology to explain how it worked, but I never found a reason to point it out in the book.
To put it in there.
Yeah, so I think it stays at 62.216 pretty much the whole time. I think by the end it might shift one digit, but like
Yeah.
so it wasn't just to look like, oh, this is sci-fi, we have different dating systems. I did actually create a whole system to determine that number.
Uh-huh.
But it never ended up mattering, and even according to the system, by the time the book ends, that number doesn't really change. So it was kind of just fluff. But that actually was hard to keep track of, because every few chapters I would have to think if it would have.
Right. If it would have made a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe you can factor that into the second book.
Ooh, boy.
Your follow-up.
I don't know if there's room for... I've heard that a couple times. People say, is there going to be a sequel? And I'm like, I don't know. It would be...
Let me enjoy this one, right?
I hope you do.
Let me enjoy this baby.
Yeah.
Well, let me enjoy the fruits of my baby.
Yeah. I mean, I know standalones aren't as popular these days when it comes to books. People really want like a whole series. They want it to eat up more time. Because if it's one and done, now you have to figure out what to read next.
Well, and you put a lot of time and effort into building a world. So, I mean, I can see that you might want to or might consider writing another story based on that world.
Yeah.
Since you put all that time and effort into it. And this book does has a nice ending. Like you get a little bit of a resolution. So it doesn't really leave the door open for a second book.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you could maybe give it a shot.
I know. Like, there's more to the world that it exists in.
Right.
That I could use, and I could, because I already, I did the legwork already, so I could show people that work.
Right. That's right.
I've thought about that, because it'd be really interesting, because I feel like the story would have to be so different. I could set it in the same universe, but it would feel so different, so that makes me wonder... if it would even appeal to the same audience who likes this one necessarily. So I don't know.
All right, something to stick in your hat.
Yeah.
See what you come up with. So what did you do to get inside your characters' heads? Did you find it difficult to write from the female perspective at all?
I think I was maybe not weary and maybe not nervous, but going into it at the very beginning, I was just hoping I would make it believable. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's an entire subreddit called Men Writing Women that's all about like,
oh yeah,
poor like yeah.
I need to look this up.
It's funny, but it's almost painful because it's just very much like they have no perspective. So I didn't want to somehow end up being that.
Yeah, ending up on Reddit.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I don't know if I would necessarily. I couldn't tell if it was challenging because I think I would only know that based on how successful I was. If it turns out I was successful in making it convincingly a woman's perspective, who in my own head, obviously I don't have. Mm-hmm. If it turns out I was successful, then yeah, I guess I wouldn't say it was too challenging. But if people are like, no woman on earth would ever think that way, then I'd be like, well, I guess I did struggle with it then. I know my wife said almost all of the female characters at one point said something the exact same way she would say them, and I was like, I guess I wasn't purposely writing her into it, but I guess it just naturally happens when you live with someone.
Yes, and that makes a lot of sense actually. So, and I would think even like that would be somebody good to bounce the woman's perspective off of. Yeah. So that makes complete sense to me. So how many hours a day did you dedicate to writing the story? I
mostly, at the time I was like cooking on it, where I had, my schedule just was lined up in a way where I had time almost every weekday to actually work on it. Uh-huh. I gave myself kind of a word/chapter goal every day. So the amount of time I spent on it wasn't always the same, but it usually came out to between like 2 and 4 hours. Okay. Like every weekday for a while.
Yeah. Was this for like a year, 6 months?
I think writing the initial draft was maybe like a year to a year and a half. I can't remember if I'm factoring in revisions in there, but I remember it taking about a year and a half to get it like done being physically written, at least.
So this came out in 2024, is that correct? 2023, maybe.
Technically 23. It was an interesting thing because it was like a silent release. Like I didn't even know it was actually out when it was available to buy, because my personal copies hadn't shipped yet, and I wasn't like notified. So I think it had been out for like 2 or 3 months before anyone knew you could buy it. And so I had an opening, I guess, of 0 sales because nobody knew you could buy it.
Yeah. Oh no.
But I think by the time I figured out it was for sale, it might have been 2024 by that time.
Okay. All right. So, how did you come up with the title Internal Damage?
So I hope I was being relatively clever because it has a few meanings. First of all, because even though it would be classified as a sci-fi, obviously, but even though that's the case, it's a lot more like a human story.
It is, yeah.
The humanity of it is way more important than any space battles or
the
weird creatures. Yeah, it's all very interpersonal. And a lot of the harm that comes to the characters, since obviously
nobody's off limits.
Yeah, and they're not. But and even though that's obviously true, yeah. Even though that's the case, they're not. I would have no cast halfway through if I was killing them off left and right. So a lot of the harm coming to them is more psychological and emotional, and so a lot of that's internal. Once you hit kind of like the plot twist areas, you realize a lot of the source of the threat of the book is something that happens inside the body, if that makes sense. And then since Lawson, the character of Lawson, was supposed to be the original POV when I was going to make it just one, once you get to the end of the book, it'll make more sense. But how his story arc kind of concludes, there's sort of a double entendre when it comes to the idea of what's going on inside Lawson. Okay. So I sort of combined a few. I was like, those all summarize like kind of the plot, while also explaining some of the message of the book. So
it's a fitting title.
I thought it worked.
Yeah, I agree. So the book was published by Dorrance Publishing out of Pittsburgh, PA. How did you get connected with them?
Honestly, I just shopped around. They're technically a vanity press, which it's not a traditional publishing house. It's kind of like assisted self-publishing almost, where it publishes through them. I don't need to print the books myself. I don't need to box them up and ship them to people who buy them. Right. They sort of help you out with that end of things.
For a fee?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they have a fee. Traditional publishing, they pay you to distribute it. Vanity Press, you pay them to do it. Right. And I'm not tried and true. This is my first book I've published. So I did sort of I had to go through other channels, and I just kind of found them. I was between them and one other one, and after a few phone calls back and forth between the two, I landed on Dorrance. Okay.
So the cover art was done by Triptych Press. And how did you get connected with them?
So actually, that's bundled in with Dorrance. Okay. That was just a part of the deal. They were like, they told me you could pay a different artist to make a cover of your own if you want, but part of their fee is to cover the cover art. So they made a convincing argument of, well, you'd be kind of paying twice if you pay a different artist to do it, because you've already basically paid us to do it. Yeah. Right. So.
The art is great. It's funny to me when I start reading the books, I typically don't pay a ton of attention to the cover. And then once I get into it, I'm like, oh, I got to look at the cover. And then I'm trying to figure out who the characters are and just taking it all in. So they did a good job.
Yeah, they told me to give them like a basic outline of what I wanted featured in it. And I think they gave me like 4 sketches of examples, and I picked one, and then they finished it out.
All right. Was there any part of the writing and publishing process you didn't care for?
Yes.
Tell us.
Once I got past the creative stuff, I've written the story, I've revised the story, I got to do all the things that I enjoy, and that part was over. Everything after that.
Oh, okay.
I have no acumen for marketing.
Sure.
So when it came to pitching myself and querying myself out to people and then going through the actual physical publishing process and trying to get book sales, that was beating my head against a wall. That was really hard, and I was not having fun.
It takes a lot of energy, I imagine, and I would be the same way.
And there's so much I didn't know, and so much, honestly, I still barely know. So, yeah, it was like wandering blind, but it's almost the most important part when it comes to actually getting the book out there.
Yeah.
So it was frustrating, but it was necessary, though.
So was there anything that surprised you as a result of writing the book?
Yes. I think since I had all the ideas going in already, I mean, I changed from my original outline as I was writing it, I changed very little. I guess as George R. R. Martin would say, I'm more of an architect than a gardener. But
I like that.
Where I plot it out, I know exactly what I'm doing, and then I do it. I think I changed one major detail and a couple really tiny ones. So I knew that all the ideas were already there when I started, or before I started even. The thing I didn't expect was that during the writing process, I kept getting a bunch of new ideas, but not for this book.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So the actual process of writing through it gave me a ton of ideas I could use for future projects. And I didn't, that surprised me because I assumed I would just be laser focused on this one because it's the one I'm actually working on. But throughout the process, I just started accumulating new ideas and new things I could try. And by the time I finished the book, I racked up enough that I was like, okay, I'm gonna use some of these for the next thing. So
how did you keep track of the ideas? Did you just put them in like a Word document, or?
Depends on the idea. I kind of mentally compartmentalize. I have certain ideas, and that's how this book came to be. I have ideas that float around. If I think they're really interesting, I will write them down. I have like notes in my phone and a document on Google Drive. But for the most part, I'll just let them float there. And my philosophy is if they're good enough and they can kind of cohese with other things, then they'll stick around. And if it's not that great, it'll probably go away on its own, and it doesn't matter if I forget about it.
Okay, sure.
And the ones that float to the top and that stick around, the ones that work together kind of cling to each other. And once enough of those kind of magnetic connections occur, then I kind of form a fuller idea. And that ends up usually being my next project.
Okay.
So,
what advice would you give someone working on their first book?
Ooh. Yeah, I would think, honestly, imposter syndrome is going to happen no matter what. So instead of trying to fight it, this is going to sound cynical at first, but I promise it's not. It's almost like lean into it like we are all imposters at first. You know, like
trying to find your voice.
Yeah,
your
you're not an
voice.
author until you are. So just, you know, there's so many steps to the process that can beat your morale down. And it's really easy to stop seeing it as worth the effort that it's taking. So I think that's the biggest hurdle to get over. I think everyone's got different methods through which to motivate themselves and be regimented. And sometimes you get bogged down in the weeds and you're like, well, I only wrote 80 words today. That's terrible. Yesterday I did a couple thousand. But progress is progress. And all the hurdles are there to be jumped, and if you keep going, just don't let yourself get defeated even when you are when right. I got so many rejection letters when I was, and most of them were automated. Like I don't think the person ever looked at anything that I sent them. So it's really easy to just be like, oh, this is impossible. Okay. And it's like, to an extent, some things could be, but like you gotta, do you want to go for it or do you not?
Yeah,
and
right.
I think that's the hardest part is you're like, you think that you're some nobody. And it's like, well, I mean, everybody is at first, at least.
Until there's somebody.
Yeah.
I know.
And you can't guarantee anything, but that's not the point. Like, it's like you cannot guarantee book sales. You cannot guarantee that you'll get famous. But
but what's the bigger point of you doing it? Like,
exactly.
I write poetry and I submit my poetry online, and I get a ton. I mean, I've gotten some accepted, but I have way more rejects than accepts. But what if I really truly think about it? Why am I doing it? Like, yeah, it's great when somebody appreciates what you've written, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah, like it feels bad, but what made you start?
Right.
Like
yeah.
that's still there. Yeah, your reason for wanting to do it
Right.
is still present. So you gotta keep your eyes on that as much as you can, which isn't easy, but that's
I agree.
really all I can hope for, and all that I think anyone should try.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot the conversation a little bit.
Okay.
I'm going to ask some fun get to know you questions. Who is your favorite science fiction author?
So that one's the most vanilla and basic answer I could ever give, which is Frank Herbert. It's the answer everybody gives, I'm sure. It's either that, most people are going to say that, or Asimov, I'm sure, or Clark. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've read a decent amount of sci-fi, and I've read a lot of like modern and contemporary stuff that I really enjoy. And I tend to really like the space opera, kind of like the very genre heavy. Which is funny because I don't think my book's that at all. But yeah, Dune, I don't know. There's a reason it's as famous as it is.
That's exactly right. And they've made it into another movie.
Yeah, it just did stuff that nothing else has done, and it set such a precedent for everything that came after. And I'm sure I consciously took very little inspiration from Frank Herbert with this book, but I'm sure it's in there. I'm sure he influenced something in there because that's just how big he was. And
Right.
I feel no shame in taking that seemingly cop-out answer.
Okay. I like it. So if Internal Damage were made into a movie, who would star in it?
So I've thought about that, and part A of my answer is going to also seem like a cop-out, but I think the main cast, like the kind of the younger cast, the ones who come from Habitat WA1, I feel like it'd work best if they were kind of no-names.
Okay.
Because...
Up and coming?
Yeah, because the whole thing is you're supposed to learn who they are, and you're supposed to see how they change. So you need to see how they begin. But if they're people that everybody knows, you already have thoughts on them. And I think it's better if you're completely fresh. That being said, I feel like the older characters, the military characters that come in...
Joanna and Al.
Yeah, I think you could probably get some A-listers there. I mean, name recognition is everything these days, so I suppose you'd almost have to sell tickets. But I don't know. Joanna, you could easily go with like a Charlize Theron.
Yeah. I envisioned her, that way.
Yeah,
very tall.
Because she's got that badass, but she's also, if I can say that.
Beautiful.
She's got that, but she's also like, she can be motherly.
Yeah.
And anyone playing Joanna would have to have both. Al, I could see as like Aldous Hodge, I think would do a really good job.
Why am I not
playing
familiar?
Al.
Who's this?
Ooh, okay. So he's not all over the place.
Okay. Good.
I guess if we're talking more Oscar stuff, he was in One Night in Miami.
Gosh, I'm going to have to look this gentleman up. Aldous, I'm going to probably spell it wrong, but I'm just going to write myself a note here. Hodge.
Yeah, I think it's Aldis, maybe? And then I want to say it's Hodge.
Okay.
He was, I guess if we're going more mainstream pop culture superhero media, he was in Black Adam. He played Hawkman.
I think I saw some of it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a masterpiece, but it was. I guess that was a big budget summer movie that came out. So
I probably will recognize him when I see his face.
Yeah, I think he's one of those actors for sure.
Okay.
And I think Matthew Morey, like the Colonel. I mean, I think he only has 3 chapters, but I think Bruce Greenwood would be a good one, and he's one of those actors. Most people wouldn't know him by name, but you would recognize him anytime you saw him. He's in so many things, but he's not the first person to come into your mind when you think of actors, I guess. But
what role would you most like to play if it was made into a movie?
So honestly, if this hypothetical, and I like acting, I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
If I were middle aged by the time this hypothetical adaptation came out, I would want to be Matthew Morey. Because I definitely would want to take more of a supporting character role. I would hate to play the main character in my own thing. I would not enjoy that at all. So
I understand.
And I guess this book kind of has like 6 main characters. So
it does have a lot, yeah.
I would really want to be him. But if this movie was getting cast tomorrow, I'd probably want to be Carlos. You never see him. He just calls them. But I think that'd be a fun little cameo role. like, oh, and the voice of that one guy is actually the author of
Yeah,
the book.
that's
I would
true.
like that. I
That
think I would
makes sense.
enjoy that.
Yes. Yeah, I get it. So, if you could spend the day with another popular author, who would you pick?
So popular author, I would say probably Joe Abercrombie. I would say he's newer, but geez, I mean, his first book dropped in '07, so I guess at this point, that's not recent. But yeah, he's just, I don't know, I'm really glad he's popular right now because I feel like he does a lot of things that aren't popular right now, where he really takes risks. Mm-hmm. He's willing to do something nobody is, which is make unlikable characters, but he makes them so compelling and believable that you're still drawn into them, even though if you knew them in real life, you'd probably hate them.
You wouldn't want anything to do with them. Yeah.
He doesn't play it safe. He allows the tension to be real tension. You don't necessarily expect the good guys to win in his stories. Mm-hmm. And I think some people can get depressed by that, but it means I actually feel something when I'm reading his work.
Right.
And I like that philosophy, so I think that'd be a great conversation. But I've seen interviews with him, and he's so down to earth and just fun and chill. And as grim as so many of his stories are, he's just a regular dude that I could totally picture having a really nice conversation with. So I think he'd be my pick.
All right, I like it. So what's next?
There are a few ways to answer that, I suppose.
Okay.
Writing-wise, I mean, like I had a few people ask if I want to do a sequel of this book, and right now, no.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess if there was a big enough demand, I could do it.
Are you pleased with whatever the book has done? Like, has it had some sales?
Yeah, I'm really trying to find more promotional methods right now, at least locally. It had a pretty big boom when at least when we were first aware that it got published.
Right.
And there were some friends and family, but then word of mouth carried it a little bit. But that's tapered off a little, so I would like to give myself a little boost.
Yeah,
and see if I could factor in a few more sales. But a good chunk of the reason isn't even just so I can feel popular or feel like it's doing well, but I've already finished the next book that I want to publish.
Oh, sure.
And I would really like this to be a springboard for that.
Yeah.
I noticed a lot of the reasons I got so many rejection letters and that traditional publishing wasn't really an option for me is they are looking for people who they believe can sell a book.
Yeah.
So at the time, they all have fill-out sheets that'll say, have you ever published a book? And how many have you sold? And I said no and 0. And I think that was really hurting kind of how I looked. I didn't look like an author. I looked like somebody who just whipped up some words on a word processor and tried to ship it out. So I like this book in and of itself. I'm really happy with how it turned out.
It's a good book.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm genuinely proud of it. But I would kind of like it to establish me enough that people can at least take me seriously as an author because they can see I've done it now. So
that's right.
I think the next one, now that it's done, I would almost like this to help lift that up, if possible.
Yeah. So last but not least, how can interested fans reach out to you?
So I'm finally becoming more active on socials. That was another thing I think that was hurting me for a little while. But yeah, I mean, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, those are all going to be decent ways. I can't remember if my email is listed anywhere on like Dorrance or anything, but I definitely am receptive to that. An actual website is forthcoming, so that'll be soon enough.
Okay.
But I mean, any and every way. But yeah, I think the social media would probably be the most convenient way to reach out to me at the moment.
Okay, great. Lucas, thank you for joining us on Pages of Voices today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. It's been great to get to chat and to get to know you better. And thank you to those who listened in. Stay tuned for more authors on Pages and Voices. I'm your host, Meg Bell. Until next time. Thank you for joining us on Pages and Voices, a source for local authors and their stories. From the studios of Access Fort Wayne at the Allen County Public Library in downtown Fort Wayne, Indiana, I'm your host, Meg Bell. A special thank you to Kay Gregg for her work engineering and editing this episode. We've explored fascinating stories and insightful discussions today, but our journey doesn't end here. Find more episodes of Pages and Voices wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this podcast, please show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends and family. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations with the area's authors and their insights into the written word. Until next time, keep turning the pages, and we look forward to welcoming you back soon.